uses that. She's so good at it. She's our biostats at Amherst and runs most of our trainings. So what do we remember about quantitative study designs? And I think we talked a bit about this. We said they're very numerical. Who remembers? What did we say? What do you remember? We said yesterday, we compared the quant and the qual. Yes, one. One characteristic of quantitative research?
We said quantitative research.
One thing.
We don't start from theory. We start from theory.
You often start from theory. Something else you remember about quantitative research? Yes?
There are deductive reasoning.
Yes. Very deductive in reasoning. Any other characteristic of quantitative research?
In terms of the numbers, often you need greater numbers.
Quite often in quantitative research. Why? That there's something about the characteristic that is associated with the numbers. What is it? Another key characteristic of quantitative research we talked about yesterday.
Generalizability.
Yes. Quite often, quantitative research, the way it's set up, you can generalize, and you will see why, because of the study designs that we use in quant. Yeah? So when we talk about what is a study design, we're just talking about the structure, the plan that the PI has. Yeah? To help them, they have these specific objectives, so they need to have this plan that they will use to deliver on their project. So you need to explain fully in the study design. Usually in the protocol, we call it chapter 3. What will you do? How will you do the sampling? How will you collect the data? What variables are you using? And what's your plan for data analysis? So that needs to come out clearly. And all that is aligned to the design that you select, all right? So why is the design important? And why should you consciously think about the design you're using? Yeah. If you are thinking you want to see whether a certain intervention in A and C is making a difference, you have to start thinking about what exactly you're going to do, what the study design will look like, what sample you're going to use. It informs the sampling. It informs the kinds of measures you're going to use, yeah, how you will measure those measures, if there'll be a pre and a post, for example. And then you will be asking yourself, how much data do I need to collect at how many points? And you'll see there's some designs you require to collect data maybe 3 times in the pre, 3 times later, and things like that. So you need to think about the design early when you're thinking about what it is, the end game, what your outcome is going to be. So it's very important. So the right study design should have these 4 key things. So first of all, I want to start with this one. I've received protocols that are so complicated, but when you look at the study title, it can be done more simply. Especially sometimes it's the early learners. A master's student, they've never done research before, so they come with this big thing, and I'm like, but you don't need an RCT for this. You don't even know how to do an RCT. How will you even have access to that patient with that type of cancer? The feasibility of that study is way off. Maybe they just got excited, because during the lit review, they were like, I can do this, is so interesting. So avoid unnecessary, as simple as can be to answer the question. It should be feasible. The design allows the study to be done within the resources that you've got, right? And then novel. Remember we said it's not research if there's nothing new you're adding. So that novelty. What is new about what you're doing? Maybe one study was a cross-sectional study, but now you want to add an experiment to build off what Anne has done, to change what happens, to the diabetes patients if you add this particular intervention or something like that. So there's some novelty. And then the last thing is, of course, we should be answering a priority need in the end user, or something is going on. Maybe the priority needs in the county or something like that. So there should be relevance of interest to the local community or to society at large. Why is design important? It can be a waste of the sponsor's money if you get it wrong. You can go collect data, you come back, we analyze, and we realize there was no way your design could have told us whether the intervention worked or not. And you have been at it for 3 years. Poor design may not answer study questions. Yeah. Poor design means the analysis can be wacky, so it's not even fabrication of data, it's just wrong from the word, but the rigor is off. Everything is not working, all right? We've said about waste of resources, and it's not ethical to expose patients, especially. Even if I'm not a patient. To take a whole hour of my day or you're doing maybe a series of things, you engage me 3-4 times, and then it was all wacky, it's not helpful, it's not ethical. In fact, we say, I think I talked about this yesterday, we tell PIs to take the least amount of time from a participant. And we said collect the minimalist amount of data you need to answer your research question. So if you do all this with a fancy design, and in the end it's not working, if the design was not good, it means it's not ethical. So there's this hierarchy, and you can guess where qualitative research is. And I like the way Anne Monkey talks about it, but she's top here. She's very biostats. So you can see Akobeng talks about how you can put it like in a pyramid, and they get fewer and fewer as you go up, and it becomes, as the pyramid goes up, it becomes more and more quantitative. So there are many different types of studies, and some people argue the higher you go, the better the evidence, because the quant studies are seen as more rigorous. The causal relationships can be confirmed a bit more. There's, the multivariate analysis, so you can hold this, hold that, and you can tell the story better than Violet's opinions, telling stories by the well. So remember those stories by the well, Violet stories. You need to be sure. Remember we said process, how, and meanings. If you want the story of why Violet gave birth at home and she had a bad plan, it's okay, you can come here. But you don't want, if you need numbers to tell stories, but you see what he's saying, right? But I'm not now you know I'm a multi-method person. I'm at a point where I think this stories, by the way, is as important as the survey I will do with the women and their spouses on the delivery. But this is important to know. Right now, people who are doing scoping reviews and systematic reviews, actually when you're doing a lit review, now this is another tangent, now it's a teacher in me. Nowadays, my default, when I'm looking for data on anything, I start with the systematic reviews that have already been done. You know why? The guy has already analyzed all the papers on the topic and put it in one paper. So you start with those and you look for the ones in the last 5 years. Then you have a folder, you put those ones there first, all of them. Then the ones that are even more recent, you look at their reference list and look for more systematic reviews that they cited. So what happens in the end, you already have, when you're telling your supervisor, the current knowledge on that, or evidence on that, you're so confident. Why? I have the systematic review, the latest, and you're able, so this thing about the more you have experiments and more systematic reviews, the more it makes sense right there, but still my story at the well holds water. Decision making. Here is a guide that Professor Mwangi uses to guide her students when they're thinking about a study design. What is my study about? Why is this study being done? Where will the study be carried out? You remember someone asked, what if you're doing a study online? You remember how, online research? So you start thinking about that, what am I doing? Yeah? What type of data do I need? Where can the data be found? What periods of time might I need in my study? Maybe a policy has been introduced by the government on ART, on reproductive health, reproductive technologies at point X. Maybe you're interested, so there's something about timelines and things that you're doing. What might something look like? What techniques will I use to collect the data? How will the data be analyzed? In what style will the report be prepared? And another important one, how many resources do I have? How much time do I have? Time is the biggest resource. So I've seen master's students with a very nice project that can be done within the time frame of their study. And we encourage them, we say, this is really nice, but can you maybe make it a phase 2 in future as a postdoc? For now, can you narrow it to just these 2 specific objectives? Yeah? So you have to think about that when you're making the decision about that. So then she has this fancy decision when you're thinking about quantitative research design decision tree. So she says, ask yourself, can I assign an exposure? You remember the pyramid? The more you can experiment, the better the evidence. So she always asks, if you can't, okay, this summer too, you just go with the version you can, but if you can't, so let's go down the tree. Yes. So no, if it's not, do an observational study, and there are the examples of observational studies. But if it's a yes, if yes, I can assign an experimental, then you say now, aha, now, can I randomize the exposure or not? So if you say no, then you have the line there. You can go the quasi-experimental studies, and there's a examples of types of specific designs. But if you say, oh yes, in this particular study, I can actually randomize the exposure. And yesterday we talked about placebos and all kinds of things, you know. Was it Pakistan? And then when you say yes, you say, because I can randomize the exposure, I can consider a design that is experimental in nature. All right, and remember, we are thinking about resources also, time, sites, all those things, the amount of money you need and all that. Then now when you come here, there's a whole basket of them. Then you decide what you're going to use. All right, so take time to look at that. And I'll talk just a bit about some of this and see, I don't know, who has used which one? Who has used any of these experimental studies? No, I'm not going to shake you. So here, let's say a bit more next. So I want to talk a bit more about the experimental side, and then we'll talk a bit about the other. So now we've said, I can have an experimental study. Now again, you see more questions there, but it helps you. So you say, aha, is it a hybrid design or adaptive design? What's the level of randomization? Okay, is it an RCT where it's individual level and step point or whatever? Is it a cluster? Maybe I'm doing Chogoria Hospital and another hospital. Is it step wedged? I'm introducing at one level and then later and all those things. So even under experimental design. So I wanted you, the reason I said this slides this way, I wanted to see it's a lot of work. It's something you don't just wake up and write, oh, my design will be X and you send to Iserc. You need to show the ethics committee that you understand all this, even all the way to the sampling, how it relates to this. Are we together up to here? It's so important, and so when you're reviewing that protocol, when you have this idea, if someone says, I'll use a step wedge design, you should be able to say, I wonder why they've used a step wedge design, and then you see how they're planning to do it. All right? So when you're randomizing, again, you can randomize by time, like the step wedge design, or it can be a cluster. We've done, like the example I showed you from AMPA, we had 6 clusters. We had Busia, you saw that Busia, Mosoriot, and all. So it was a cluster, but within that cluster, there was work we were doing there. So we had a cluster, randomized kind of approach. All right? So let's talk about RCTs, because these are very, very common, and we use them quite often, and they will pop up in your ethics committee as protocols. This is where participants are assigned to a control or to an alternative. So there's something going on there. The Pakistan one, it was medicine. They were getting something for the babies or for themselves? For both, ma'am? Yeah. During, and the children, isn't it? Yeah. So here are examples of groupings. Sometimes you can put a school or a hospital. For us, most of this, sometimes we do sub-counties, hospitals, you go there, whatever you're doing. I've seen people in School of Education doing these types of studies, and they have primary schools or secondary schools. It depends on what you're doing. But you need to be clear, is that the individual level, or are you doing it at the cluster level? And what within the cluster, what are you doing? So random assignment takes place at the organizational level. I've seen people throw coins, others put things in a box and speak, you know, all kinds of things going on. But the thing to remember is that you need to be sure this is the method that you need for it, yeah? And if it's not, because this is very expensive, and you have to have the measures now to think of how do you, there's contamination sometimes that has happened in the AMBAT sites. You're doing something on this side, you think people are not meeting and whatever, so you have to, those kinds of questions also come up quite a lot, especially where your presence as an organization is widespread. When you look at the step wedge, the key thing is to put in other steps. We are doing this in Kilifi, where we are introducing the point of care for A and C. We are trying to have all the packages, everything a mother may need from chicken to syphilis, whatever, bringing it to the farthest dispensary nearest the villages. Because they will come, get one thing done, then they are sent to a dispensary so far away, so they don't go. So we were like, what if we had a point of care? But we said we can't go everywhere at the same time, because also we want to do the research. So it means you start site 1, and you might say we will be there month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, isn't it? Yeah? So you finish there and you keep going. And you have to think about the contamination, so you have to explain and justify why you're stepping down the way you're doing and why site 1 and not site 2. So here it's sequential rollout of that intervention, all right? And you require a very good plan. It can be random or not. You have to justify why you're doing it the way you're doing. But the key thing is that each cluster you're going to, or each individual that you're starting with, receives an intervention, but it's in steps. It's in steps, all right? This, for ethics, you remember the one about the biscuits? Were they biscuits on the protein in the refugee camp? Yeah. Why would you use a step wedge for that one, for instance, for ethics reasons? Why would you use that design in the refugee camp when you're giving out something like that, a protein feed? What happens with the step wedge design is that you are bringing something to the community that everybody needs and deserves to get. But because you want to do research also, you can convince the Iserc to allow you to roll it in steps. That's what we did. Because we felt the mothers in Kilifi, especially in those far-flung places, they were very needy, very poor neighborhoods. Why would you take the point of care kit here and not the other place? It's the principle of justice. So the step wedge design allows us to actually apply the principle of justice, but in a way that it allows us to also do research. So remember that. So it's really, really, when you're doing a study like that, where everybody needs that kind of intervention. So you will only be justifying maybe based on resources or how far places are, why you would go to location, why site 1, site 2, site 3 is place X and not the other. But in the end, 100% of the schools, maybe it was something on oral health you're doing in primary schools. At the end of the day, all the primary schools will have received the intervention. But you explained why the dental program was stepped. Then we have what we call the controlled before and after studies. And I think we just go to the diagram because it summarizes it quite well. So here, again, you have two groups, yes? The program participants and the comparison group. You do a preset, you intervene, and then you do the post-test. So here, participants are assigned to either of the groups. There's no random assignment. And usually for these kinds of studies, you want a baseline data. Like the example I've given you, we've gone to 47 counties. We've collected data on diabetes and hypertension. For the next 1 year, we have like 5 partners who are intervening. Then we are going back to do an endline. For that one, we don't have those who, we did the baseline in all 47 counties, but the interventions are in select counties. Okay. Then we will go back and do a post-test. So the key thing here is that the study and control size should be comparable as much as possible. And this is very common because this doesn't require a lot of planning, a lot of resources like some of the other approaches. Then there is what is called the interrupted time series. So for example here, the government introduces, the example I was giving, a new policy on VHC or something else, or on whatever it is. And you want to see, oh, okay, this happened, this was a period, maybe this is pre-policy period, then this is post-policy period, and you want to see what happened at that point. Maybe it's something you've introduced Jogoria Hospital in the surgical ward, or something. So the key thing is that this design helps us to detect whether the intervention or the new strategy has been effective or made a difference. In, again, this is an example. We are, the Cardiac Society of Kenya contracted the Focus Research Organization, where I told you I'm a member, to help them because they got funding to roll out new guidelines to help with hypertension care. Did any of you, I think we didn't come to the private facilities, but there's that guideline. They told us, can you go find out if the guideline, first of all, has been rolled out to all those first, and if people are using the guideline. So you would do something like this and say, before the guideline, how was care looking like? Yeah, and after the guideline, what's going on? So usually this one will require that you're very clear to the IRB how many data points there will be, and you justify those data points. All right? So it's very important also to mark the timing of that intervention at Jogoria ANC or wherever it is. Otherwise, we get lost along the way. It becomes very muddled, and the fidelity of the process is not clear. So this one requires you to really be very clear about the timing of the things that you're doing and the data points. You might say, I will engage the mothers At 3 months pregnancy, 6 months pregnancy, and just before delivery. And you justify why. Maybe it's a birth plan you did and you want to, or whatever it is. But for this type of protocol, it's very, very important that the timing is captured. Then we have, you remember that she had that design where you go, no, yes, no, yes. So these are the guys who are not very, very experimental. And she gave 3 examples of studies, the cohort, the cross-sectional, and the case control. So the cohort is common one, yeah? Longitudinal, isn't it? I think that one we know, where you're trying to capture incidents or the natural history. And here, you may have an intervention, yes, and you can measure it. You follow the patients through time, and it's not as, you don't have to have a comparison and things like that. Cross-sectional is like a picture shot. When you take a picture, I came and I found, and you just report that's what you saw, isn't it? Yeah. So you can't do much about causal relationships and things like that. Then the case control one, here she talks about retrospective comparison of 2 groups, and the aim here is to identify predictors of an outcome, to permit the assessment of the influence of a predictor on the outcome. So it would mean that maybe, again here, it could be that policy document or something that you're using to create a difference in what it is you're doing. Case controls, I've seen, like we have an adolescent health clinic in Moi University, and we're trying to make it one of the best youth-friendly facilities in Kenya. So we keep trying different things to test and see what works better or what doesn't. And we find ways, maybe we use the social media for mental health follow-up. There are others we are not using social media. So there's a bit of cohortness, but also a bit of control, just to see what is going on. So these are more of all of them analytical and observational. And these are what many master students and PhD students who are just starting off, they can comfortably work with these types of methods, and then they go more experimental, maybe in postdoc and in larger teams than on their own. All right? Sample size. Now this is a big animal in the house. So depending on what your study was about, and depending on the significance level that you're looking for, you have to think about those numbers. And you have to think about, remember all the segmentations I was drawing here for qual? It still applies for quant. All right, if gender is going to be a key predictor, you know, if location or if age, things like those, you have to think about this. How large should the sample be? The truth of the matter is that if you can do a census, it's a perfect one. You have 100% of all the data you need, but the reality is we can't afford to do that. But sometimes we can do a census. We've seen protocols where people are talking about a survey, but the people, I'm trying to remember the example. The population of interest was so small. And we say, oh, you're going to be interviewing, I don't remember, I'm trying to see which one would come to mind easily. You're trying to interview all the deans, and you want the deans of a school, and you want to do a sample. How many deans are there? So it's just an example. Or you want to talk to the chiefs or the Nyumba Kumi administrators. You can do a census, yeah? Especially if it's quantitative. So the larger, the better, all right? And often increase the sample to account for lost follow-up. So after I've done the calculation and it comes to 384, as is usually the case. Yeah, and especially where it might be a bit longitudinal and things like people die, and especially if it's patients who are living with a condition, you may want to factor in, and I don't remember what's the number, but there's a way, is it a 10% or 5%? Anyway, you add to the sample to ensure, yes, I saw your hand.
Yeah,
Tony.
The 384 is the common one, but now you give us a split of the boxes. Now, from 384, maybe age is a factor.
Yeah, here is a slide. Yes, talk to it. It's exactly what you're saying. Go ahead.
Age is a factor.
Yeah.
And I want to get a representation of the age. Maybe you decided below 21 and 27 and above, something like that. So how do I decide that below 21 I will need 50, and maybe above 21 I need 20? What should be the range?
The point is this, now you're thinking quantitative. That's what we were. Yeah. Here, things to consider when you're thinking about the sample size. Okay, let's go through this. First, the budget. Yeah. You can do a census, yes, but it's very expensive. Yeah. So research costs. Each time you add a participant, especially clinical trials and others, that's why some clinical trials have very few numbers. You look at what's the minimum number you need for you to answer the research question. That's the first rule of thumb. All right. So. Then. See the one that said number of categories is what you're talking about. You plan to divide your data for analytical purposes later on. Let's say for our study, we had 6 clusters. So already that's one level of analysis. We want to analyze again, you know, what's going on across the clusters. Within the clusters, we had health facilities, remember? Tertiary, all the way 3 levels. Yeah? Apart from that, we have patients. And then in the patient groups, you may say, oh, gender, maybe hypertension, already evidence is showing there's something about being male and female and cardiac. We know that's a fact, isn't it? And a few other things. So you'll be thinking about, so you think about all your planned analysis, the different segmentations, and the minimum number of participants you may require for that. All right? Then there's the issue about, like we say, the resource called time and the staff. You have to think about the software to use to calculate the sample also. Because people have been asked, why Mugenda and Mugenda? So then there are others and things like that. You need to be sure you know what you're doing. You need to know the prevalence of that condition in that area and things like that. You need to know if it's like the interrupted time series and things that where time matters. You need to think about that. When will the study be done? And so where will the sample be? How, this stepwise thing, how will it look like, you know? So you have to think about that and how that might affect. The other day, when we were doing the Kilifi one, we had a nurses strike, and it affected the step wage at one site. So those realities, and it affected the sample size, and sometimes you may have to go back to the ethics committee and say, we may need to change this. But the key thing, she always emphasizes this. We look for a biostat at the end of the study. You need to have the biostat person early. Actually, when you start explaining to them what you're doing and your design, they are able to see all these little boxes that we miss out. They'll even tell you, no, the prevalence, what was the prevalence? They help you and they pull up material and guide you. So, and that, someone asked, does that mean I'm not doing my own project myself? It's still your thesis. It's still okay. Yes, please.
I have a comment.
Yes.
What I've learned from numbers and during my dissertation, sometimes you have to do a feasibility, just like a feasibility study. Well, not in a study, but if let's say I'm hoping to collect data on hypertension,
correct.
I would actually have to go and look at the records even before I see and these patients actually are actually there at a very infancy stage, and it's the data, and then also the data set you are looking for. It's also good to make sure that this data set is available, because often you have a whole, you have a nice protocol and whatnot, but when you now start collecting data, you realize that people are not going to be documenting the variables of interest. So I think that was just a comment.
No, it's very important. Reconnaissance.
Yeah.
For any project, even a cool one, we'll have a bit of information. That's where key informants come in handy. If it's a facility visit and have an idea, some of the annual, maybe like you have data meetings monthly in Togoria Hospital or annually, there will be somewhere there's some information available. And you can, I cannot, I don't even know how, I cannot overemphasize what you just said. It's really, and that's part of collecting evidence ahead of time and identifying the gaps. So you will see what's been done, you will see what the gaps are, so that you can even further justify why you're doing your study. And you're right, especially for desk reviews. People come and they say, we want to do some work on stroke or heart failure or whatever, and then the protocol goes through Iserc, it's very nice. Then they come to the hospital, there's no data. Most of their variables, maybe 80% of the variables are missing, or there's so many gaps, then you can't actually do the study. Yeah, that is just good to think about it. Yeah, so think about generalizability to the population of your work as you're doing the work and as you're thinking about the sample and the subset. And this picture captures also the qualitative ones, but you need to add, do you have clusters? Are you stratifying those clusters? And within those clusters, is there a systematic way of, recruiting the third or the second patient who came in the morning? Do you know there's a difference between patients who come in the morning and the